Greetings and salutations. I had a wonderful AA experience. I'm going to talk about reciprocal altruism and then move to chastity. Um, I got to go swimming in Lake Erie this morning. Um, so here's a quote from Robert Trivers. Who is Robert Trivers? Robert Trivers wrote about reciprocal altruism in the Quarterly Review of Biology. It's his theory, the evolution of reciprocal altruism. In 1971, actually, it's about 22 pages. It was published by the University of Chicago Press. Um, so reciprocal altruism is the idea if you do good for someone else, they'll do good for you. So it's reciprocal, right? Versus being a parasite or symbiosis. Um, so um, let's see. On the topic of coping mechanisms, one is what do we do in rehabilitation with the family? I believe um, Christian Bale and Leo DiCaprio, the whole paparazzi thing is about how Hollywood stars often have to go to rehabilitation because they have addiction issues, issues with sex, sexual addiction, they're pro-sex. But on the topic of family, we look at family values, kind of a constant in the Republican um, kind of big tent. And yet we see many transients through society and we wonder why. So a special instance of mutual dependence is that found between parents and offspring in the species. The relationship is usually asymmetrical. Uh, Parental care, of course, is to be explained, but there's no reason why selection for reciprocal altruism cannot operate between close kin. Um, the idea is that there is something called mutual dependence. Two people are mutually actually dependent, not independent of each other, but dependent on each other. So strong dominant hierarchies can reduce the extent through which altruistic situations can actually help um, kind of thoughts that lead to actions or habits because of a long history or dominant care, and especially because of codependence. They are codependent on each other for love. Therefore, you need an objective person, um, such as an AA or a sponsor. To go further, Robert Trivers wrote a book called Wildlife. Wildlife is about his exploration in the Galapagos Islands with the iguana, who makes many begging gestures, but he certainly defeated the iguana one on one. The iguana ran into a tree. Um, so, yeah, it's a great paper. Um, he mentions what I mentioned. Clearly, once a fish's primary way of dealing with ectoparasites is by being cleaned, it is quickly vulnerable to the absence of cleaners. So, once again, if you're at home in the family room, all is well. But if you go to AA and then there are addicts who give you addictive substances, the parent is not there. Therefore, the parental love can almost lead to disappointment, um, can be counterintuitive to the idea of independence or self reliance. It is deeply biological. There's no data showing a decrease in warning tendencies with decrease in the genetic relationship within earshot. Indeed, a striking feature of warning calls is that they are given in and out of the breeding season, both before and after migration or dispersal. So, what we're looking at is kind of a predestined or what we call a salient condition that can lead to addiction, right? It's not being a good or bad person, but what weakness do Americans today um, kind of possess that leads to high levels of addiction? Um, helping in times of danger, accidents, predation, sharing food, helping the sick, the wounded, or the very young, sharing implements, and sharing knowledge. All these forms of thoughts and actions often meet with criterion of small cost to the giver and great benefit to the taker. Um, so instead of family, we could look at what he mentions as kin selection. The human species also meet the preconditions for the operation of kin selection. Early hominid hunter gatherers, such as Luke and John and Jesus, um, consisted of many close kin. And they also have altruistic behavior between men, like between men and women, or like birds and squirrels. In both forms of selection, um, from kin and non-kin, is there a selection effect, right? Where the reciprocal altruism is different between those you select and those you do not. Are there also age-dependent changes? What about gross and subtle cheating? If there is reciprocal altruism at the human being level, indeed, there would be cheating, shirking, we call it in work. Um, and then lastly, as a result of that weakness, despite human altruistic behavior, even goods ratios, half a loaf is better than none. Um, the subtle cheater would still, in the awkward situation, permit adaptation to repression. Um, so I definitely recommend reading this. It's again anthropological, um, and really interesting to understanding weakness in human beings and how it leads to um, kind of how it's correlated, at least, to things like addiction, depression, things like that. So, my thought is the idea in reciprocal altruism would one be of sexual relations, as Bill Clinton decided. One thing we know about Jesus Christ that we carry through the church today is that men love their mother, right? The Republican Party, Mitch McConnell, Rand Paul, um, many others, Mitt Romney, even Gavin Newsom to a certain extent, touts the love of family values. One word intrinsic to it is the idea of family, right? But we can substitute it with kin selection. But what it led to, the demise of family values, led to an ugly picnic, or kind of the public sphere being overtaken by ugliness, deformity, homelessness, things like that. And that, as a result, led to a virtue of chastity. Um, Many people in Oklahoma City, in the Middle West, in the Middle East, tout the values of chastity. That comes from Jesus Christ about 2,000 years ago. On the topic of evolution, it's not going to get it done. Chastity, in my definition, means charming. It means someone who is charming. But back then, it meant someone who was sober, right? Wine's a big thing. Jesus didn't drink. Mahatma Gandhi didn't drink. So sobriety is the Christian virtue. Um, Not abstinence against judgment from the opposing sex or something like that. It creates repression, greed. If I were to choose today, I would say people who are chaste use the idea that it leads to wealth. If you, at a young age, 5 or 6, choose to be chaste, knowingly sacrifice some human connection for intense wealth. Sex, however, is natural. Having sex is natural. That's where children come from, a lot of times. And it also can create intense levels of wealth. Sex creates pleasure, right? So, um, the kind of the Republican steed says that if you have sex, you are fallen into sin, and that's original sin. So if you look at Oklahoma City on the topic of kind of nationalism, it's very boring. So then it's repressed. They don't want to leave. If you look at the sphere, there's natural transference there um, of delusions or of greed or of synesthesia or of dementia or of amnesia. So New York City isn't boring, but it's certainly greedy. So, if we go back to the reciprocal altruism, people lie about positive sexual stimuli in their private parts. Um, there are all types of behavioral responses. One is a sexual stimuli. Um, if you were to think of aerodynamics, boats, structure, right? The idea that mud hardens, right? Even, everyone at the Met understands that, but many people in the chaste and married community, all you have to do is, go on a date in public. It's not the biggest deal, right? You don't then fall into original sin. Same with watering. In gardens, you have to water the garden in order for flowers to grow. These are biological responses that happen all the time. They're inherent in structure. Um, if you are, you know, delusional, right? If you are delusional due to weakness, then you cannot be profitable in capitalism. That's just a rule. That's the way of the world. You can't leap it to the moon. So it's the same thing. And the evidence there is medical ethics, right? We live in a deformed medical world where we're scared to go to the ER. We don't understand cancer. We have no public statements from doctors, things like that. Um, so I can give you a personal experience, which was, I had been institutionalized in a hospital for 6 days in 2020, and for a long time,